remembering my lines.
Hi, my name is Niall Miller and welcome to the third episode of Tree TV. We're here now in a place called Gortnagullion, which means Field of the Holly. And as you can see from around me, I grow a variety of different willows. We have just different yellow and they're lovely one-year growths, so you harvest them every year, and they're very, very flexible, lovely rods. But we can grow an absolute incredible variety of colours. Like you see how beautiful red those ones are and stuff. They're all extremely flexible. So I was asked to talk about what I do with trees and why I work with trees and things. One of the things I always love about trees is even from the smallest bush, you can get amazing coloured grain and texture in the woods. Like for instance, you have a lovely piece of ash here which has lovely open, very clean grain, and then you have a nice bit of yew here, which even though it probably is about 50 years old for this little piece, you have this lovely contrast with the young growth and the old growth. Then on the little table here that we have in front of us, we have legs of hawthorn, and the rest is ash, split and froed by hand. And it creates a lovely contrast with the grain, with the bark and the grain and stuff. Yeah, so here we have what they would have described as a mether in their medieval Irish drinking vessel. A lot of them were made out of willow, like this one, and they were also made out of yew, and there's even one made out of sycamore, which is quite unusual, because they. So what we do, what archaeologists seem to find now is rounded butter in bogs. So they seem to have had a kind of a high regard for these sort of things in Ireland. For some reason, it takes a lot of work to carve this out of a lock of wood, and they seem to have taken a lot of time to respect the amount of work that they went into making things. Let me see. This table here that we have in front of us is made from evergreen oak, Quercus ilex, which is a North American tree that grows here in Ireland as well. This was from Lochrin, and as you can see, there's beautiful contrast in all the grain, the modernal rays and stuff like that all there. See all that showing beautiful contrast in it. Bog oak, with it helps to contrast it. Using small little bits of bog oak and things really kind of highlights the contrast that you can get naturally in timber. And yes, so another thing is this little bowl. It's made from the elder tree, which or the boot tree. Most people would consider it a weed and not a species worthy, but I think that's absolutely beautiful. And of course you have to ask permission from the elder witch before you cut it. Very important. One of the things I love about the climate here in Ireland as well is the variety of trees we can grow. Like I'd like to show you this, it's the stone pine, which you get the pine nuts from. And this is it closed and this is it open. So you just put it on top of the range and it opens up. These were grown in County Cork. This is Mexican white pine. Actually a good forestry tree, but beautiful pine. And this is, believe it or not, is called the large cone pine. Very original name, from California. And it grows well in Ireland as well. Absolutely, it's quite amazing. We should never get stuck on the one species. Monterey pine as well, absolutely beautiful tree as well, and a good wood. Yeah, I suppose I should kind of go back and kind of explain how I got to be in Leitrim. I came up about 30 years ago to do a course on broadleaf forestry run by Cron in Lord Kilbracken's estate in Carrigallen. From there we went on to do, a bunch of us formed a workers' co-op and planted broadleaves for a couple of years till that went by the by. And then I got into more crafts business end of stuff. I was doing coppicing and wattle work and stuff like that. And yeah, so thanks for watching. And because of this crazy year we've had and all, normally I would be bringing my games. I have a range of games that I bring out to festivals for people to interact with our native woods and just to actually be able to touch timber, real things and play with them. Hopefully some year will be out and you can see them. That's with Frankfurter Woodland Crafts. Hope you enjoyed the rest of the programme, and thank you very much for watching. All the best.
My favourite tree is elusive. It is an enigma. My favourite tree must be approached from a specific angle. Sure, I could reach the tree in a few minutes if I were to walk directly to it from the entrance to the park. But in order to regard the tree properly, to achieve the correct approach, I take a circuitous route which adds 20 minutes to my walk. This is necessary. It is the pattern the tree demands. I have some very nice cameras, but when I go to film my favourite tree, I take my Haranazumi. It's a Japanese camera which replicates the feel of 110 film. The footage it produces is grainy and distorted. I choose the Haranazumi over my other, higher quality cameras because I need to place a protective barrier between myself and what I know will most likely be a doomed attempt to capture the tree. The long route through the park takes me past many beautiful trees. For as long as there have been cameras, there have been people filming the supreme collaboration, tree and sky, the ultimate background-foreground relationship. This is the first glance, the first awareness of my favourite tree. It shows one of the problems with filming my tree. It is crowded over by other trees. It can't be easily picked out, but I know it's there. Another problem with filming my tree is that it's heavily angled and has been brutally pruned on one side. I've jumped ahead here. I'm showing you the tree out of sequence because it's not spoiling anything. Its true form cannot be divined from this perspective. A favourite tree is something you experience in space and time. You have a devotion to it. You visit it in different seasons and weathers. This can never be captured on film. I approach the tree via a balustrade with 3 steps. The balustrade is very important. As I descend the 3 steps, I feel as if I'm in the grounds of Muckross House in Killarney on a beautiful day in 1893. I begin to promenade. This is the first effect the tree has on me. And there is my favourite tree, its delicate embrace extending to me. The second effect the tree has is to make me feel as if I'm floating down a river 1,000 years ago, gazing up at the tree as I drift past it, knowing that somehow it will protect me. This feeling emerges only as I move past the tree as I enter into its zone of influence. I try to film this effect again and again, but it's impossible. The Haranazumi begins overheating dangerously. As a last-ditch attempt, I switch to a different camera. I remove my protective barrier. Everything becomes suddenly vibrant, but the tree still withholds its mystery. I can't be frustrated. A favourite tree has only one humble demand: that you be there with it, witnessing the sky together. The fact that I failed to capture the tree is irrelevant. What's important is that I will get up tomorrow and the next day and the day after that and go visit it.
Hello, my name is Kim Ruffin, and I'm honored to be part of the Whose Woods These Are Festival of Trees. I thank Imar Reedy for inviting me to be part of this event, and I'd also like to thank the people of Leitrim who have posted or offered some wonderful tree photos to the world via Instagram. I'm speaking to you today from Oak Park, Illinois, in the United States of America. It's a town that sits on the ancestral homelands of the Council of Three Fires, the Ottawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi. This village was either the birthplace or home of people such as actor Betty White, scientist Percy Julian, architect Frank Lloyd Wright, and author Ernest Hemingway. Here in the United States, municipalities like the one I live in have started to declare their love for trees by applying to be designated arboretums. And Oak Park is the fourth municipal arboretum in the United States. On its public land alone, over 20,000 trees representing around 130 species live. This is the tree that told me to move to Oak Park. My name for her is Big Mama. When I was looking for a home, I went out on the balcony of where I live now, saw Big Mama in all of her summer splendor, and heard in my heart her whisper, "Baby, this is where you're gonna live." I floated back in from the balcony and told the person helping me to find a home, "This is it. I'm home. Call them." I am grateful that I had some measure of choice in becoming a resident here. And even more, I'm grateful that my elders prepared me to listen to the message of the trees. My talk today is called Heading Through the Holler. The holler was what enslaved African Americans called the secret spaces deep in the woods where trees heard them sing, dance, pray, and worship. Making time to go to the holler and honor their humanity, they were able to connect with the outdoor world, love themselves, and reverse the messages that told them that they were unworthy. In Toni Morrison's novel, Beloved, she writes about a character named Baby Suggs, who gives an inspiring sermon in the holler. And for what I understand, there might be a video clip of Baby Suggs' sermon from the film adaptation of Morrison's novel on something called YouTube, but you didn't hear it from me. I am here because of my ancestors. I'm sorry. I am here because enough of my ancestors found their spiritual sustenance from places like the holler and decided that they were more than the human systems of stigma and status said they were. They connected to the woods, fought for their liberation, and their descendants were able to live on the other side of racialized enslavement. Part of the reason why I was eager to be a part of this festival is that I know that there are plenty of Irish people who have a similar story, one of ancestors filled with the power of nature connection and community affirmation who made a way for their descendants. And so, for the rest of my talk, I'm going to use the stories of trees in the life of Harriet Tubman to point out that this tradition is something we can draw on for our circumstances today. A time when we need to connect with trees and the rest of nature again and again, so that on the other side of today's terrors, those after us can live liberated lives on earth. The trees Harriet Tubman insisted on connecting with demonstrate that there are three nature narratives: those that are imposed on us, narratives available to us all, and narratives we're bold enough to create for our own collective good. Holding all three of these narratives together at once is the great challenge of our time. These nature stories created the frames through which Tubman knew herself, trees, and the larger non-human natural world. As a protagonist in these narratives, Tubman had three identities: animal, human, and the most important role now available to us all, earthling. All three of these roles rely on the fact that we live in both the human-made or social ecology and the natural ecology simultaneously. We navigate these systems sometimes unaware of our embeddedness in both, but there can be no denying it. As enslaved people, early African Americans experienced trees and the larger world of non-human nature through the frame of stigmatized animality. Notions about Homo sapiens emphasize division and systems of status and stigma regarding human physical and cultural diversity. Oppressive human hierarchies negatively stigmatized entire groups of people who were falsely understood as quasi-human animals who it was okay to exploit and dispossess. This exploitation meant that the primary frame for nature interaction imposed on enslaved African Americans was racialized violence and forced labor. For example, consider a story about Harriet Tubman as a child. Glenette Tilly Turner's children's book, An Apple for Harriet Tubman, tells the true story of the young Harriet, whose name was Araminta. She was forced to pick apples on the Brodus plantation in Maryland, where her entire family was enslaved. The enslaved could not eat the apples that they picked without risking physical violence, an integral feature of institutionalized slavery. One day, Araminta thought the conditions were right to take that risk, and because she was penalized for her agency, her body was forever scarred with the brutality of slavery. Yet in this experience of being treated as a beast of burden, denied access to a nourishing apple, Araminta made a commitment to herself to one day have a relationship of her own making with apple trees. She made a promise to herself that one day she would invert the relationship of exclusion and oppression she was forced to have with the trees of her childhood. Considered a stigmatized animal who could be forced to work for others, Araminta lived in a nature story designed by others that was oppressive. However, she chose to honor her humanity, connect with trees, and inhabit the nature narratives available to us all. For instance, as a child, Harriet wanted to escape the abuse she endured within her enslaver's home. In exercising the little agency she did have, she was able to work outdoors with her father. She responded to her own need for a safe place and found it among the trees and the Black men who worked in the woodlands. Kate Clifford Lawson writes, on the cusp of adulthood, the disabled Tubman went to work on a timber gang, exhibiting great skills laboring in the logging camps and in the fields. There she was exposed to the secret communication networks that were the province of Black watermen and other free and enslaved Blacks. Here in the forest, beyond the watchful eye of white masters, the male slaves had access to the watermen who worked in the area. They knew the safe places, they knew the sympathetic whites, and more important, they knew the danger. Because of men like the ones seen in this photo, who shared their humanity and knowledge with Harriet, she gained the social and environmental literacy necessary to transport herself and numerous others out of enslavement. Tubman forged her liberation outdoors because of these men and her bravery. And I love how this aspect of her story really shows the importance of the communal transfer of environmental knowledge. In her elder years, Harriet fulfilled that commitment to herself born in her enslaver's orchard. At her home in Auburn, New York, Tubman planted an apple orchard of her own. In a gesture that reinforced the idea of communal environmental wealth, she shared the apples with the community around her. Tubman is documented as saying, I liked apples when I was young, and I said, someday I'll plant apples myself for other young folks to eat. And I guess I done it. Then she laughed, threw back her head, and sang a song about apple cider and brandy. The agency Tubman took with her life ensured that she would have the last laugh in a life that could have been only a story of obliteration from the rest of nature. Sometimes we don't get to decide the identities and stories with which we must live. However, Harriet Tubman's life demonstrates that the narratives that are imposed upon us can be surmounted if we remain aware of our embeddedness in both human and natural systems. Regardless of who or where you are, our latest narrative imposition is being called the Anthropocene by some. This is the name used to describe the negative impact of human activity on Earth, which is forecast to have a permanent, distorted impact on evolution. In the Anthropocene, we've begun, let me start that again. In the Anthropocene, we've begun to enslave the planet with things created by human beings. Plutonium and plastics, the climate emergency, and large-scale habitat destruction and extinctions. No matter our place within human systems of status and stigma, we all have the burden of the Anthropocene. In our everyday lives, sometimes it feels like this narrative is insurmountable. And yet it's hard to imagine that the Anthropocene might yield, and it's hard to imagine that the Anthropocene might yield anything positive. Yet I believe it already has. The most significant is the reconsideration of the primary identities that have been part of the African American story, animal and human. For instance, in his TED Talk, What Animals Are Thinking and Feeling and Why It Should Matter, biologist Carl Safina chooses not to engage in human exceptionalism and stresses that the things that make us human are not what we think. He calls human beings the most extreme animal, the most compassionate, the most violent, creative, and destructive. Our compassion and creativity may just make the Anthropocene end sooner and better than we might think. Because we are also earthlings who have the opportunity to connect with trees and the rest of nature enough to create a new nature narrative bold enough for the common good. Now, I've heard of Elon Musk and the International Space Station, but I'm hedging my bets on Earth. Not because I don't think that people will live on other planets someday. It's because, with my understanding of the social ecology, I think it's best that we continue to invest in what I'm calling the Earthling era. In the Earthling era, we've begun to leave aside our human pride, gone back into the holler, and come to reckon with our dependence on and love for nature, especially trees, who Laura Weber calls our arbor elders. In loving our arbor elders and reveling in our earthling identity, we can begin to act like our ancestors before us and ensure that those after us can live liberated lives on the other side of the Anthropocene. Fellow earthlings in a place called Ireland, I wish you well as you love the trees and proudly proclaim whose woods these are. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Natalia Bayless, and this is Emer Reedy, and we would like to welcome you to the Arboreal Arts and Reading Group, which we're delighted to host today in the Dock Arts Center. Myself and Emer are in the same household, which is why we're sitting next to each other. And we're very excited today to welcome all the way from Drumcondra, Nick Roth, who is a composer and saxophonist. Welcome, Nick.
Hey.
It's great having you here.
It's great to be here.
So for the Arboreal Arts and Reading Group, what we've done is we've asked an artist whose artwork somehow pertains to trees to pick a text for us to discuss as part of the reading group. So we'll discuss the artist's work and then discuss the text that they've chosen. So Nick, I think pretty much straight away when you and I met, we started talking about compositions and trees, because we have that in common. All three of us do, actually. And you have a great project called the Woodland Heights Project, which you were running, which is, what I thought, this is great. I need to know more about this guy. Sure, tell us about it.
Woodland Heights was the beginning, I guess, of my musical foray into the world of trees. But it really actually begins in my childhood. I was fortunate enough to grow up in a place with a lot of trees in it. And so when I was a small child, my best friends were trees.
Aww.
And Woodland Heights is the name of a piece that I wrote. And it's also the name of the house that I grew up in. It's a piece for orchestra, for string orchestra, that includes the planting of a tree within the score. This is the place where I grew up. It's a little place called Chorley Wood, just outside London in Hertfordshire. And Chorley Wood was King Charles's wood. It was a royal wood. And actually, we're talking about Edward O'Connor and how forests think in this, but I just read an amazing book talking about forests, which talks about how the original forests were decreed by royal order. And so there's this like long connection between a kind of a monarchy and a forest, which kind of pertains to this in some regard. So when I was 8 years old, there was a kind of a competition in the local kind of parish to design the parish council logo, and we all kind of drew our logos, and I won the competition. And so that's the logo there. You can see obviously there's the tree in the center, and there's the kind of hills behind it, and then the river runs through it. In my original drawing, though, there was a hand coming out from behind the tree holding a stick, because there's a tradition in Chorley Wood. There's a common, and the tradition still stands from before the Enclosures Act to go out and beat the bounds, it's called, where all of the villagers go out with a stick and they mark the edges of the commons. And it still exists. And I, as an 8-year-old child, thought that was really central to it. Obviously, the graphic designer who did the final thing thought it was giving the wrong impression to visitors to Chorley Wood. So you can see that that was the house, and that was our back garden.
Oh, lovely.
So there was a lot of trees. And
so with the Woodland Heights project, you said you planted a tree during the performance. So was the tree planted outside of the venues, or?
So the like tied up in this piece is actually quite a lot of fairly deep trauma, actually, because at the end of 2013, we lost, like, our family lost everything. The house, it was sold to builders and knocked down. The forest was kind of destroyed and everything. And so I'd kind of come to this place from working a lot with water and working a lot with birds and flocking. And I was very interested in this kind of the score or the music being kind of a transformative process for the performers and also for me as a composer writing it. And so I went to Paris just after that happened. I had a residency in the Centre Culturel Irlandais in Paris to write this piece for orchestra, and I decided to dedicate it to the trees of that place, to Woodland Heights. And so the piece itself is a model of that forest and how it would grow over 700 years. And for that, I read a lot of books One of the things that I'd learned from the kind of the bird piece was that if you really want to know something about a field, you just write to whoever is the world's leading expert in it, and they will just get back to you straight away. And so I looked up biodiversity, and I got an email for someone called Thomas Lovejoy, who is one of the scientists who coined the term biodiversity. And I emailed him and said, I'm a composer and I want to do this study of forests. Can you help me? And he wrote back 20 minutes later, and he'd CC'd Dr. Margaret Lohman, or Canopy Meg, as she's known in the trade, who founded the field of forest canopy ecology in the 70s. And it's a very new discipline. Prior to Meg's work, it was very difficult to survey large areas of forest because it was difficult to do that. You needed cranes, which were very expensive and difficult to bring into a rainforest, or you used balloons, or there was all kinds of methods, but it was very slow, very expensive. And the discipline took off because they borrowed these things called SRTs, or single rope techniques, which is basically where you take a harpoon and you shoot a rope up into the canopy, which could be 70 meters above the ground, and then you just climb up a single rope. So it's very easy, it's completely non-destructive. And suddenly it allowed Western scientists, because obviously people who lived in those rainforests have already been doing this for thousands of years, but it allowed Western scientists to go and survey massive areas of the rainforest. And from their work, they had to multiply the total number of estimated species in the world by 300%. Because what they discovered was that in the canopy layer is 90% of the biodiversity in the rainforest, because that's where the light is. So you have like frogs up in the canopy layer that live in these little bowls of water that are caught in the leaves, who will never touch the ground. Like frogs that haven't touched the ground for thousands of years, you know, thousands of generations of frog. And so through Meg and her work, I started kind of reading around that. And another book there, The Ecological Thought by Timothy Morton, was really important around this time. Gregory Bateson's Steps to an Ecology of Mind. I mean, again, I could talk about any one of these books for much longer than the time we have. The Forest People I'm going to talk about in a little bit. When I'm working on a piece that involves a lot of science, I'll always have a kind of a counterpoint book to that, which just comes at it from a very different angle. In this piece, that was The White Goddess by Robert Graves, which tells the story of the kind of a global shift from a matriarchal to a patriarchal religion, starting with the white goddess becoming the triple goddess, and then the triple goddess becoming the Christian kind of Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, and so on, and then a reversion to the Mary cult. But he tells that entire story through Ogham, and through the way that the Ogham changes over time. And so there's trees are very much obviously embedded in the Ogham alphabet and in that book. And in that white goddess, there was a kind of a key. So the way that the piece actually works, I picked 6 species from the garden, and there were kind of early colonizer and then dominant types. And this was when I was working with Henry Horn. He was one of the scientists who kind of explained how that forest would grow over time. And the way that biodiversity increases is really interesting with forests. Initially, you have a kind of a clearing in the forest, which could be from a wind throw or a fire or an old tree coming down. And the first trees to grow will be the early colonizers, which are the small trees. Like in that forest, it was the silver birch or the laurel or the holly. And they're trees which will reach sexual maturity very quickly, 6-7 years, and then fruit, and then seed. And then those seeds kind of go into the floor, into the seed bank. But over time, the big trees will take over, like the oak or the beech. And so you get these kind of over 300, 400, 500 years, it will become an oak wood or a beech wood. But then at some point, there'll be another kind of disaster event, and those big trees will fall, and the little trees will then seize at the light of the clearing and have a chance to grow. And so in these kind of successionary phases, you get maximal biodiversity. You know, if it just stayed as an oak wood, the biodiversity would be minimal. But because you have these kind of phases of growth and rebirth, or growth, death, and rebirth, you increase over time, you know, over tree time, the biodiversity in the forest. So the piece takes each one of those species and it maps it to a string in the orchestra. So the silver birch, for instance, is the high E on the violin. And the silver birch lives for maybe 60, 70 years. So the gesture would last for 60 or 70 beats. One beat in the score is 1 second. And so over 60 beats, the violinist will move over the harmonics of the string. So starting with the fundamental and then going all the way up to the 13th partial. And that kind of gesture expresses that. And then it recedes at the second partial and it goes to other things. But then as the bigger trees come in, the lower strings, so the oak or the birch are like the low C string on the double bass or the low G, which sounds, because we hear sound from the bottom up, it means that when they come in, it sounds like it's in C. The root of the piece is C or is G, which is the equivalent of the light of the canopy being dominated. And so then these kind of phases happen and it starts and re-stops. And this was all fine. But one thing that I was kind of missing, I'd already kind of written into the score that there'd be leaf rustling and branches because I wanted the orchestra to be really immersed in to be going out and actually have leaves there and branches and in some way to bring, this is a very long answer to your question, but I wanted to bring the trees into the concert hall, and for the orchestra to be directly involved. But I was still kind of missing something and I'd written all of the score instructions in Italian because I wanted the orchestra that I was sending it to at least get to the end before they threw it in the bin. And at some point, I realized that I'd made a massive mistake and I had left out a viola. And this is about 2/3 of the way through the piece and I was like, left out a viola? Like, what am I going to do? I had 3 months to write the piece. I was like, okay, well, I could go back to the beginning and write in like a kind of a nonsense, like fourth viola part, and I was like, that just doesn't seem right. So I was reading The White Goddess, and there's this line in that book about the wild apple, the Malus sylvatica. And I had this idea, well, okay, if biodiversity is increasing over time, maybe I could introduce a new species into the piece. I'll introduce a wild apple. And so in the beginning of the third movement, I had the viola soloist come in, and they play a cadenza, which introduces a new tonality. They're in the scordatura, they're in a different tuning, and they are the wild apple. And that kind of transforms the music of the piece. It increases the kind of harmonic content of it. And then as I was writing that, I realized that at the end of their solo, they needed to si piante un albero. They needed to plant a tree. And I knew when I wrote that into the score that the orchestra weren't going to play it. But I just had to do it because the idea, like music is so ephemeral, like music finishes and it's just gone. And there was so much of this kind of real trauma tied up with the piece that I wanted there to be a real tree that went into the ground, and that even after the music had finished, that tree would exist and actually would have a slightly better chance of surviving because it's such a pain in the ass to plant it because you need a full orchestra. So that was the final score. In Paris, there was an artist, Ruth O'Donnell, who helped me to do the illustrations for the score. These are all of the individual species. She could only draw from life, so I had to run around Paris and find all 7 species of tree. That's the Malus sylvatica in the corner there, the wild apple. And so in the end, the score is for string orchestra with a viola solo and tree. And you can see a little bit. So in the end, it represented Ireland at the ISCM Festival, the International Society for Contemporary Music, in South Korea, where it's played. Another instruction in the score is that it has to be a native tree. So it was a Camellia japonica, which is a camellia tree, which is native to South Korea. And it was planted on stage. And then by complete coincidence, the next day was National Arbor Day in South Korea. It was National Tree Planting Day. So it was planted in front of the concert hall, the Isangyong Concert Hall in Tongyong.
So who planted the tree? Did you have instructions?
Allow me to show you with my cunningly prepared PowerPoint presentation.
I'll take a sip of tea for this.
I really love, you can hear the trowel there at the end. So that was
Nice.
William Lane, he was the viola soloist.
Oh,
So that's just the end
nice.
of it. The piece is about 14 minutes long
Yeah.
in total.
How many times has it been performed? How many trees have been?
Once.
Once. Oh,
But
lovely.
that was the kind of the first part of the project, Woodland Heights for string orchestra. And I remember I was in Paris, like as I was about to leave. This is April 2014, in the courtyard, speaking to Nora, the director of the CCI, and we just kind of somehow came up in conversation that it would be great to do this for children. And so pretty much as soon as I left, I had this idea to write a second version of the piece, which would be called Little Woodland Heights, which would be a version of the same thing, but for children. And one of the main reasons for doing that is that from the flocking work that I'd done, I realized something about what I call music as translative epistemology, or how can you come to know something through music. And one of the things that I'd realized is that we kind of interact or interface with music in three ways: as a listener, as a performer, and as a composer. And they're quite different roles. You know, like if you're just in the audience listening to a piece, you're just a listener. If you're on stage, you're a performer, hopefully you're also a listener.
Yeah.
But unless you're an improviser, you're not the composer. And it's in the kind of the role of the composer that these kind of rules or kind of like translations of rules take place. It's in the writing. And so with the orchestra there, they're on stage, they're reading the music, they're listening to each other, but they're not writing it. They're just kind of reading it. And so they're not really engaging with the rules. And so what I needed was for the children to actively be the composers of that piece, and the listeners and the performers. But I needed to kind of hand the role of composer over to the children and effectively set the score up as a way of creating the music rather than the music. And in that way, it would allow the children to be listener, performer, and composer, which then leads to this kind of transfer of an embodied kind of knowledge.
Nice.
And so that brings us on to the book that we're talking about today, How Forests Think, by Eduardo Con. And
we're going to just focus on the intro today as part of our reading group, so for anyone following along.
Yeah.
At home.
I mean, I'm sure if you're sitting at home and you've read the intro, you've probably carried on.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, the intro just is really a taste. He just goes through what he's going to talk about in the book, and it's so amazing what he's going to talk about that I'm pretty sure you haven't just stopped there. So, I mean, yeah, this book was very much a central text to the project. This is Little Woodland Heights, and this is in collaboration with the Arts Council, the ARC, the Children's Theatre, the California Academy of Sciences, and IMA. So Meg Lohman had by this time moved on to be the director of the Institute for Biodiversity, Science and Sustainability in the California Academy of Sciences. This is in Golden Gate Park in San Francisco. It's an unbelievable museum. The front half of it is kind of a public-facing kind of natural science museum, and the back is the Biodiversity Institute. So there's 750 full-time research scientists based in the building. It has this living roof, which remarkably, but also kind of tragically, is the most biodiverse acre in the entire state of California, which is kind of amazing.
The entire state?
Yeah.
Wow. The trees are
and inside they have an entire coral reef, and they have an albino alligator, and they have penguins. I mean, it's like a ridiculous.
Oh, I've been there.
Yeah.
Sorry.
The penguins.
Now that you're
the penguins with the
well,
trigger.
the albino alligator
I
and the
remember
coral reef,
Yeah.
and they have those like circular like things with all the jellyfish going around. You can stand around. Yeah, it's amazing.
It is an unbelievable.
Yeah.
So I got to be the artist in residence there.
Wow.
And that was where I wrote the piece. And
how long were you there for?
It was about a month.
Oh, lovely.
In total,
Nice.
in summer 2015. Oh, sorry, no, January 2015.
Brilliant.
Yeah, it was this weird Californian weather, where January is actually really warm. but kind of misty, and it was
Yeah.
really kind of special time. And so effectively the way that Little Woodland Heights works is it's a 10-week program for primary age children. And in the 3rd week, all of the children go into the forest, and each one of them chooses their own tree. Because I really wanted there to be this relationship between the child and the tree, that it was their tree, this is my tree. And so the piece kind of provides a way of mapping the tree to music. And Eduardo's work comes into it in a very specific way, which is to do with dreams, which we can talk about. But I'll talk you through the kind of the mechanics of it first. So there's kind of 3 mappings of each tree once each child has chosen the tree. And the first thing is that they look at the architecture of the tree. And that was one of the things that I learned about in California, is that there is such a thing as tree architecture. There are architectural types of tree. And this comes from the work of Francis Hallé, who's kind of the French version of David Attenborough. He'd hate me saying that, but like he's an incredibly popular figure, kind of an elder statesman of botany in France, and has made huge amounts of films and books. And so he created this kind of architectural way of looking at trees. The second thing that they look at is the leaf pattern of each tree, which is something called phyllotaxis. So the way the rhythm thing works, say the child picks a palm tree, which is pretty unlikely because we did it in the Dublin mountains, but you never know, that the rhythm that they would then choose would be this oof, 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 oof. And you have 1 meter on the tree is 1 beat. If there's a kind of type 2 architectural type, which is a dominant trunk but lots of small branches like a pine tree or a fir tree, you'd have this doof, doof, ka, doof, ka, doof, ka, doof, ka. As you can see, the branches are going up in stages. And then if the tree splits into 2, the beat splits into 2. So you get this doof, ka, ka, daga, daga, which, as well as teaching the children to really look at the tree and understand which kind of architectural type it is, it also teaches them to read music. Because if you can understand that the beat splits into 2 and the tree splits into 2, you understand the kind of the visual analog of how rhythm works in music. So that's one mapping. The second mapping is to look at this phyllotaxic type. So there are 4 phyllotaxic types in the world. Every single plant that you look at is one of these 4, which means that the way that leaves grow on the stem is either alternate, as in it's like this, or it's walled, it comes in bunches, or they grow in opposite pairs, or it grows in a spiral along the branch, which is a Fibonacci spiral. And every single plant that you look at is one of these types. So it's kind of like almost like a Jungian archetype way of looking at all of the different trees in their maximal diversity and understanding the kind of the macro forms and types within that. So the way this works, when the child looks at the leaf type of the tree they've chosen, they then map that onto the stave.
Oh, lovely.
So if they had an alternate leaf, then their melody is low, high, low, high, low, high. And so they have a melody from their tree and they have a rhythm. And this obviously also teaches them to read pitch notation. If you can understand that the leaf goes up and down, you understand that the notes up and down go up and down in pitch. It's not telling you that it's an F and it's a C, but it's telling you kind of this is a low high. And this idea was that the trees are giving a rhythm and they're giving a melody, and that tree that they'd chosen was somehow kind of now embodied in that music.
That's brilliant. Well, we should, we're getting on in time, so we should get onto the text probably.
Yes.
I love this. Myself and Emer have been reading through the introduction a few times. We didn't go on to the rest of the book because we wanted to really focus on this. And I just there's one quote I loved in the introduction. Forests are good to think because they themselves think. Forests think. I want you to take this seriously, and I want to ask, what are the implications of this claim for our understanding of what it means to be human in a world that extends beyond us? And one of the reasons I really love this is because we were talking to Diana Beresford-Krauger about, she had said in her book that forests think as well, but that forests can dream. And I love all the stuff about dreams in here and how all that works.
Yeah. Well, so to talk about how forests think, one of the things which is really clever in the book is the way he uses Peircean semiotics, or Charles Peirce's idea of semiotics, which is this icon, index, and symbol way of signification. And so by this very kind of technical language of, of philosophy and of thought, he actually proves in the book that by the very definition that we give to consciousness, forests are thinking. They do all of the things that we define consciousness as, and he shows how that happens and how that is manifested in the forest. The dreams, his kind of focus in the group is the Runa people who live in the Amazon in Ecuador, and he really looks at the way that the Runa live with the forest, and the way that they live with the forest is very much through their dreams. That they believe that when you die, your spirit exists in a kind of another realm, a spirit realm, which you can communicate with through the dreams. And in that realm, you can also communicate with your ancestors, and you can communicate with the spirit of the forest. And so they see this kind of dream world as a doorway or as a portal into the forest. And so when they wake up in the morning, they're always analyzing their dreams. It's like Freudian psychoanalysis techniques, essentially. But it has a very pragmatic purpose, because they believe that if in your dream you kill an animal, like a guinea pig, in your dream, then its soul, its anima, is already dead. So the next day, if you go to hunt it, you'll be able to catch it. And so it's very tied in with the practical lives of living from the land, and foraging in the land.
Because he says, as well, he points out that when he was staying there with them, how because you're in the trees and because of the way you're living, your nighttime sleeping isn't just like a full night's sleep as we have in a bed. You're in amongst the trees. You're being woken up by the sounds of the trees. Someone's always getting up to put more wood on the fire. And in the morning, they'd compare not only their individual dreams, but the same dreams that they'd sometimes realize they'd shared from the night before, from all just having this one pool of images and
there's a shared kind of consciousness, and that is the tree consciousness. I mean, I think one of the dangers of humanity actually is that we have a tendency to be anthropocentric. We have a tendency to place ourselves at the center of everything and understand everything through the human. But so our mapping of consciousness onto the forest is in itself anthropocentric. But what he is intimating at is that there is a kind of a forest consciousness which is not necessarily the same consciousness as we have. It's more of a blurring of the boundaries between different types of thought and different types of thinking, which we can access, but not necessarily in the same way that we would kind of consciously think about what we need to get in the shop when we're going to go and buy stuff in the local grocery store. It's a different kind of thinking, and our dream world has this kind of blurred edges. In the piece, I'll explain how that kind of worked into it. The third mapping that the children do is that they make a recording at each tree. And then they listen to that recording and they amplify the gestures in it. So if they hear leaf rustling, then they amplify the leaf rustling in it. But in order to kind of bring the children into that space, I needed to use the children's dreams. So the morning that they go to the forest, each child writes down 5 words from the dream that they had the night before. And then on the way to the forest, all of those words are assembled into a dream text. So you have all of the children's dreams on one page. And then if the tree that they're recording has a cranny in it, which also teaches them the Irish word crown, then while they're recording the audio, all of the children whisper from the dream text, which sounds like this. And then at the end of the day, they go to sleep, and then the next morning, they write their second dream text. And you get to see then how that experience of spending a day in the forest filters through the children's dreams.
Lovely.
So the first dream text is all like eggs and monsters and da-da-da. The second dream text, after they've been in the forest the whole day, is all green and spirits and fairies and water and light, and you can actually see it processing through their subconsciouses. So that was very much how the book was kind of embedded in the piece.
That's brilliant. Yeah, because in the book, like, he just talks about how so much about, like, we just try to, like, put names on things and otherize them, don't we? And make them other, and then it's like, but as soon as you're immersed within them, they're in your dreams straight away, and then they become a whole different thing. And you don't need that language anymore to try to categorize them and to try to put them into different, you know, this is what this is. You just start to have them as more part of yourself and within yourself, and you're within them, and it's all the one. And
yeah. I mean, I do think that language is part of the separation. You know, and it's the third aspect of the Peircean Siamod. It's icon, index, and symbol. You know, the symbol is this uniquely human language thing that we have, and you know, it is an othering. That's why I'm interested in using music as a means to learn something, how you can come to know something through music, because it's a different kind of knowledge.
Yeah.
It's a different kind of knowing, you know, and it's an older, or at least as old as the roots of language, if not older. You know, and I think that the way that humans use music is much closer to the way that all animals and even all trees use sound to communicate.
Yeah, yeah.
The last kind of part of that was listening to the Bamabuti pygmy music.
Yeah, this was a book we were thinking of discussing for the.
Yeah, if we had another interview,
if we had,
I
next
talk about
time,
this.
we'll
This
talk
is
about
unbelievable, and I highly recommend that you read this. This is a really incredible book, and you know, amazing music. So that was kind of that was like the map for what I wanted the piece to sound like, and you know, so the score effectively is a book that tells the facilitator how to teach it, and you know, this is what it actually sounds like in practice. This is the premiere in the Ark.
Brilliant.
So this has been done 4 times. That was the one in the Ark, and then that's the a Taxus baccata yew tree. There's a mulberry in Immer.
Nice.
And a larch
nice.
in Ukraine.
Lovely.
Yeah.
So we're just gonna finish up here, running out of time. We highly recommend this book. And do you want to finish up by telling us about what you've got coming out soon, which is really exciting?
So those are the 2 pieces I have that involve planting a tree, and there's now a third, which is called Crown, and it's a setting of a poem by Richard Berengarten, translated into Irish by Gabriel Rosenstock. It's for 3 voices, but each one of the singers also kind of performs a rite. One of those rites is a tree planting, and the tree here is an Irish oak, Quercus petrea, and then the second rite is the making of a vessel, and then the third is the making and burning of a boin currach, or a coracle, which has an incredible weaving. It's kind of like a basket weaving, which
the Skelligs.
that's Skellig Michael. So we just did that last weekend.
Oh, lovely.
And that is going to be a film which will be released on the 21st of December, which, depending on exactly when you watch this, is either like tomorrow or in 2 days' time.
We'll link to the In the comments, we'll have the link to where people can watch the film.
Amazing.
So in the comments
yeah.
of the video.
So that will be the third kind of tree planting
Brilliant.
work. Yeah.
Lovely.
So thank you for having me.
Thank
I
you
could
so
talk
much
about
for
this stuff
coming
for
to Caravan
hours.
Shannon, and this is great. I think we're just going to sit around and talk about composing and trees for the next few hours. Thanks everyone for tuning in.
Take care, plant some trees.
nickroth.ie, is that your website?
It's nickrothmusic.com.
nickrothmusic.com. Thanks, Mason.
Thank you.
Yay!